Hello and welcome to yet another feature focus session for the B1 Usability Package. Today's session is SQL Report, and what we will do is we'll have a quick overview of the basic stuff, what SQL Report is actually about and what you can use it for, and why you should use it. Then we will dive into some of the advanced formatting on what you can do with some of the more new features in the SQL Report formatting system. We will look at the selection system that's in there, and finally we would look at the end of the brand new charting features that is in there. Just for reference and why we actually make this, SAP have some offerings into you can use some on-screen reporting, which SQL Report is in general. SAP have of course the query generator, and they also have formatted searches that you can use as reports and selectors. I won't go into much details on what is the differences, but there's some lagging features in the query generator. While it works and such, it's hard to read. It's the SQL is shown. It's not as configurable to be out of the box. Formatted searches as well, not really discoverable, no formatting and so on. What I'm coming at is SQL Report is the best of both worlds of these two tools, much better than what they have, and we can do even more with these tools. So without further ado, let's go into the basic and some demos on what to do. So here I'm in Business One, and today I will be working off the sales quotation with some function buttons that all run different SQL reports. But as always with universal functions, and in this case SQL Report, you can run it on any screen and even from menu items and any kind of, if it should be a button or if it should be when you double click something or whatever. This is just for demo purposes that I have chosen sales quotation, so I can just run some data directly off here. So let's start with the basics. I have a SQL report here, and it's just a simple report. I have not even done anything specific to the formatting or anything. I've just written a SQL and had the tool launch it. The way you do it is you of course have your function buttons and have it run a universal function. And in my case, that universal function is of type SQL Report. And you can see I have a very simple SQL here. In general, all my samples is not about the SQL in here. It's all about the formatting of the data behind the scenes. We won't go in and complicate things further with more advanced SQL or more correct SQL. This is just for demo purposes. So I have my report here, and when I run it, it looked like this. And a quick tip for people needing to tweak their reports all the time, you can actually right click on these and go directly to exactly the same screen as you go by the function button and so on. So click anywhere on the report itself and it will open up the configuration. So let's look at the configuration. What's is in here? First up, we have the full control over the form title. So we have it there, and we have full control over how big you would have it on the screen. Then I have the view type, which in my case is grid. Later on you can see there's charts, but we'll get to that in the end of this session today. I can then also control the form state, meaning that if I put it into maximize, for example, and rerun it, you will of course see it will show fill up the entire screen instead. So that's just basic information of titles, size, and so on. What I can do is I can also do something called collapse level and something called formatting. And in order to show you that, let me quickly show you that this report and this report with formatting is exactly the same SQL. I have just formatted a bit more, because if I take this SQL and run it up in Query Generator, you will see a bit of difference compared to this over here, in that the unformatted yet have not the same column names, and SAP put in automatically a golden arrow. We don't have that, and the doc total here is right justified, and we don't have that yet, and SAP can do some summarizing here. So as you see it, just out of the box, writing the same SQL in both tools, SAP is actually a bit ahead. The reason why we're not trying to parse your SQL like they do and try to figure out what should be where is because we want to make it configurable for you. You might want to have something entirely different happen, or have a different column name than customer vendor code, or whatever you want. So we don't try to say what's best for you. We instead give you the options to do yourself what is the best. So again, mentioning, I have the same report here. I have the golden arrows put in. I have it's right justified. I have the sum in here, and I even have this special thing called collapse level, where I group it by year, then group it by business partner, and so on. So let's see how we get from here to here. And what we do is, first of all, we go in and use the collapse level, which is the grouping part of it. In the final one, I had 2 groups levels, but let's see it in more steps, what happens. If I have it at 0, which is no grouping, it just looks as we see it on the screen right now. But if I turn on the first grouping, we will see that we now have grouping. There's nothing more to it. And it's just by the year, so it's by the first column. And similar, if I turn it into second column, we can see that it now have actually the right structure, but we have not formatted yet. We have still some columns up here and some right justification, no golden arrows and such things. And for that, we have the formatting. In the old days, you needed to write the format in a special syntax here, but nowadays you don't even need to do that. You need to go into the wizard. So the wizard have a lot of features. I will go into the basics in this part of it, and later on when we come to the advanced, I will go in and use a bit more of these special things that are out here in the system. But right now, we just, again, for reference, had this one, and we wanted to put in, first of all, some titles up here. So we simply just write some titles: year, customer, customer name, ref number, and total. So that's the way we do the titles. You could also do it by as something here, but I will recommend against it, because later on we will see that we actually use these technical values behind the scenes to use in validation systems and so on. And if you make something a bit more out there with spaces and such things, it's more difficult to write those macros and validations. So I always recommend you always put your titles in here, no matter what. Second thing we had was that we wanted a golden arrow, and the way we count it is that's on column 2, 1, 2, and we tell what kind of golden arrow do I want. And you can see you have a lot of choices going to the different business master data, documents, and such things. So there's all these kinds of things, and later on we'll see if we don't have anything that fits, you can go in and make it into your own system on what it should do. But in our case, it's very simple. It's a business partner, so we just tell it that. And the final thing we want to check in here was that our total column, we wanted to have it right justified, so it's easier to read the numbers. And we wanted to have a sum column. If we do that, an update, it will turn this into a special syntax. Again, not really needing to know this anymore. In the past, you needed to write it manually. If I update this and go from our basic report that we hadn't formatted before and into now, we see we actually get a formatted report. We get the golden arrow and we can click it, of course, so go to the business partner. We get the right justification, we get the sum total, and we get our column names as we specified. So again, there is a bit more compared to SAP, but you have full control. You have the control if you want right justified or not, exactly how you want the columns to be up here. So that's the main reason why we don't want to try to parse it for you. One final thing regarding that was the collapse part. We can say it should not start collapsed as it did before, so we can decide if it should be opened with all these slide outs or not. Okay, let's move on. And the second part I want to go into is dynamic syntax, because right now what we saw was just a SQL with no special attachments to the screen we are on or anything. What we can do is we can use the dynamic syntax in here as well. And by dynamic syntax, I mean two syntaxes. The one is being this syntax where we have the item.column.type and take some value of the screen we are on. I will get a demo in just 1 second. And the second one is the reporting syntax where you have this %0, %1 in order to actually ask for something before we run the report itself. So a sample of that is, I have this one, and I will go into how it looks like in just 1 second. This one is actually asking for which sales employee should the invoices I have in the report, who should have actually be the sales employee for that. And also it will take only things that are for that specific business partner we have on the sales quotation right now. So you can see we get only Earthshaker Corporations and only the invoices of those Earthshaker Corporation which Sophie Clark has in her or she owns in this field down here. So let's see how that was done. Again, this is just the selection screen behind the scenes. That's you're also configuring that. But again, to get to the report, I normally right click and go to the report. And what we can see in here is dynamic syntax, as I mentioned, the item.column.type. So you can see it's essentially the same invoice selection, but I put in a where condition, and that where condition use 4.0.0. And 4.0.0 equals the card code up here. You can see that by going into the system information and look in the lower left corner that it's item 4. So that's the reason why it's 4.0. So 4 for item, 0 for column, 0 for that we just want as a string. And with B1 UP, it's again very easy to get by, if you've seen some of our earlier sessions, you know about this copy system information, where I can very quickly go in and get the item syntax in here. We can also use the table syntax, but we normally recommend to use the item syntax. So get that in there and put in the condition, and it will automatically take the data from the screen and put it into the turn it into the right value before we run the SQL. Then you can see I have also the second condition in my case, which was sales employee code. And there I used this syntax, which is the normal syntax from the query generator. It has that same syntax, so we have inherited that as well. In the query generator, you don't need to tell anything more specific about it. It just assumes what it means, which is a good thing, but also a bad thing, because if you begin to write very complex SQL, sometimes the SAP parser of your SQL breaks down and simply doesn't understand what this means, and you actually end up with a report not running. So again, we have taken the approach of saying you need to specify what %0 means to you. And for that, we have what is called the SQL variables. Again, some special syntax on how to write them, but again, we have the wizard and use that. In here, you can see we can use up to 20 of these variables in our SQL, and it will pick up if you use them or not. And for each of them you need to tell what source it is. And in my case, my source was sales employee, but you can see there's tons of different options. You can even ask for just a custom string, some custom number, some custom decimal or date. You can ask for yes, no, business partners, items, and so on. And even if you cannot get one of them we have, you can actually write some SQL that we can turn into a combo box for you, so you can actually have any kind of selection in there. So in my case, my source was sales employee, and I can choose the caption. So the caption being the one we're seeing in here. In my case, I wrote sales employee, and then I wrote Sophie as a little demo note for me to remember that it's actually Sophie I need to choose in the demo. But of course, in the real life, you wouldn't write that part of it in there. And again, if you use the SQL, you need to write the SQL here. It needs to have two columns. The first column should be the technical value, like SLP code, and the second one should be the ones we actually see in the screen. So you can see the first one out here is the technical value, and the second one is the name. So essentially, if I were to make sales employee myself, I would do something like this: write sales employee and write select SLP code, SLP name from OSLP, which is the sales employee table. So essentially, these two are doing exactly the same. But you could then go on and say special where condition where you only have the ones in the special department or anything. So you have full flexibility with the SQL, with a little more work, of course. Quick note on this as well is that you can actually also use the formatted syntax up in the form title itself. In my case, you can see I put in 54.0.0, which is actually the name up here. This is item 454, as you can see in here. And that means that when I run the report, you can actually see that it will take Earth data correlation and put it into the title, so the title can also be dynamic if needed. So this is the formatted or the parameters and the dynamic syntax you can use. I use one of each here, but of course you can use as many as you want in your report for the system. And again, on any screen, not only sales quotation. Okay, let's move on. Let's go a bit into formatting. We saw already a bunch of it, and yeah, let's go into it because we can do a lot of very advanced formatting. One example I have here is this one, where I've actually gone in and done a lot of different things in the system. And let me go through what I've put in here in order for you to see what kind of level you can do. So again, I go to my report, And in this case, MySQL is a bit more advanced, nothing fancy. But what I'm essentially made here is a little list that gives me 10 orders, 10 deliveries, and actually, I should probably say invoice here. So let's do it like that. So 10 invoices. SQL doesn't really matter. It's just that we have multiple records from multiple tables. It have a type here, the card code and card name, and then I have the sales employee, some rounding, some comments, and some object type and the doc entry, number card, and doc due date. So a lot of different columns in here, all for the demo purpose that I'll go into in one bit. So let's look at the formatting of this one. The first thing, let's see that we're using the banded color row color. So you can see every other row is colored. Sales employee is a bit special here, but let me show you in a bit why that is. But you can see every other color is different, so it's easier to look at. It has a little performance drawback of doing it, so don't do it if you have tens of thousands of records in here. It will just slow the report down, but for fewer numbers, it's manageable to have, and it's very nice to have it like that. You can of course always choose one to see the line itself. I also have fixed column count in here. So fixed column count is a kind of cool feature, just like in Excel has the freeze panes, in that if I have a lot of columns, it might not be able to fit on the entire screen. So if I scroll out, I lose perhaps some of the most important columns in the beginning. So if I put in fixed column count, let me quickly change it into what's default, which is 1. You will see that when I scroll out, I actually lose the card code and card name, which is the important part in here for me. So I can go in and say some of the first 3 columns should be fixed. So this being the first column for fixed column count, this being the second, and this being the third, which result in that when I run the report, you can see that the first 3 is fixed and the rest will go out with the system. So I can actually move out and still see that the declaration was this one, not needing to remember that what it was. So a nice little feature, very simple to use. Other simple feature I put in is the refresh data button. So there's a refresh button, so it will actually just rerun the SQL. And we even have an auto refresh, so it will auto refresh every X number of seconds or minutes. The reason why we have that is for people who use the SQL reports to put on a big monitor in a warehouse or anything that lists some data. So instead of someone needing to go to that big monitor and refresh ever so often, they simply go and say, okay, every 5 minutes it should just auto refresh without no user interaction, because that report will be up on the screen 24/7. So in that regards, that's the reason why we have some auto refreshing. Data targets we will get back to later on, but let's go into the formatting of this, the more advanced formatting. Because as I mentioned, I have 3 different sources here. And all of them are business partners as first column, so that's quite easy to say. All the golden arrows on this column should go to business partner. And since all of them are both leads and customers are on the same screen, it's the same screen we need to go to. It's a bit more difficult with this number, because you can see I have number 1 here, and I also have number 1 here, and number 1 here. But some of the number 1s are orders, some of them are deliveries, or some of them are invoices. So I cannot really tell this column it's of this type, because it's of multiple types. But I still want to have it. I still want to have that this one go to the order, as you see, and this one goes to delivery. So how to do that? The way you do it is first, if you have an existing report, is you need to put in two more columns. You need to put in a column that identifies the object type of the field. So object type is this generic type of everything in Business One. So an invoice is object type 13, and a credit note is 14, and so on. And in many of the cases, they have it actually on the tables themselves. So ORDR actually have something called object type, which will tell 17 for all orders, for example. And then also we have the doc entry, and that's the reason why we have both the doc entry and the doc num, is because the doc entry is what we need to navigate to behind the scenes, because there can essentially be two orders with the same number. You can have two orders number one, but with two different series. So the doc entry is the unique value, but we don't want to show the unique value to the customer, because the doc entry is just a low number. In normal situations where you have set up the numbering series, it will be that doc order number 10,000 actually have doc entry 1. And it would only confuse the user if it says 1, it should say 10,000, because that's the number in the system. In my case, my doc entry and doc num are the same, but that's only because it's the demo database. So I need these two values, but of course I need them in order to make this column, but I don't want to see them. And you can see they are actually not in the report. They are still told here, but let's go in to see what that's about. Before we do that, the two other special columns I have here is this special column here, where I actually have a combo box where I can choose the different sales employees. Why it's open right now is just for demo, so you could see it. In a report like this, it would be locked down, so it would just say the sales manager and so on. But later on, we'll see why something makes sense to actually open up as well. And we also have this rounding column, which in SAP database normally have Y and N, and we can go in and make them into checkboxes, which are more visually pleasing to see if something is okay or not okay in terms of a checkbox. So enough talk, let's look at what we did in the formatting. So here's the format of this specific one. We have 11 columns in here. Some of them are hidden. Let's look at that. But let's have a look. First of all, the titles, just like we had in the past. But you can see column 8 and column 9, and let's count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, which is the object type and doc entry. I write hide because I don't want to see them in the system. Then I have the golden arrows. We have two. So the first column should go to business partner, just as we saw in the basic one. And the fourth one is the number that coming from the different sources. And again, I couldn't really go in and say this specific one, so I'm using the one called multi-targets. You need to be on the latest version of B1 UP in order to see that. So that's in this at the time of this recording, being 2015.09. Prior to that, this system was not in there. So we need that, and in order to use multi-target, we need to tell that line two more things. We need to tell it which of the columns you have in the system is the one having the object type, and in our case it was column 8, so you choose column 8, and which of them have the primary key, in our case doc entry, that was column 9, so we told it that. So by telling these three things, I want multiple, here's the object type, here's the primary key, we will figure out the rest for you, and it will just work with the system. Prior to 2015.09, you could do this, but you needed to write a very complex macro and check some types and such things. And it was possible but this makes it much easier to do. Next one we have special formatting for is the sales employee. In my case, I've done some special here because SLP, if I just go to the order table and look for the sales employee, I only get the technical value behind the scenes. I get the -1, I get the 1, 2, 3 value, where -1 equals no sales employee and so on. So there's two ways of doing this. This is just for demo purposes to see what you can do. But normally you would do a subselect or a join, so you actually get the technical name and you will show the name instead. But you can also do it like this, where you go in and choose the code itself, and then tell the system it's a combo box. And in my case, it's editable as well, so that's the reason why I can actually interact with it. And then for the combo box, I can tell the system, out here is how that combo box should be constructed, just like we did with the parameters in the previous demo. So I can go in and tell what should be in here as a combo box value, and it will pick up the technical value from the table itself and turn it into the ones passing in here. A special note on that is, if you are to do this, the value you have in the column needs to be alphanumeric, so it cannot be a number. And since SLP code is a number, you can see that's the reason I'm doing the special cast around the system. So that's the reason why we do this. Not that often you would do this, but in certain special scenarios with some select back features, I will talk about after this part of the demo. It might make sense to do combo boxes. Column 6 was the rounding, which in the database is a y and an n, and in my case I'm just doing some simple formatting of it being a checkbox. Comments I don't really do anything about. The reason I have some additional columns here was so I could get enough columns to show the one where we actually needed to scroll. Column 8 and column 9 I used up in column 4 with the multi-target, but I don't really want them in the report themselves, so I just use the hide feature, so I can actually hide them and use them for the multi-target, but I can actually also use them in the dynamic syntax, which I will show later on. You can actually do some turn this into a screen where you can do validation systems on and so on. And finally, we had the customer ref and the due date. So no fancy formatting on those. But the most important part is that you can do this column type, you can do the hide, and the big one that was very difficult in the past is that you now can do the multi-targets. If multi-target doesn't even fit you, and it's to something very unique you want to go to, it could be even an add-on you want to go to, you can go into the system and use the LB colon here. And what that would do is it will just make you the golden arrow, but it won't do anything special, or you need to decide what that should be. And this is this column where you could actually go in and write a macro saying, when I do this, open up this add-on window, go to find mode, paste over the number I have here over to that, and click find. So you can go in and make them entirely your own if you want to. But for most cases, we have covered the most important parts for you. So it's a rare case, but it can be done if needed. Only one we haven't talked about here is the column width. That's just if you want to choose exactly each column's width, you can go in and write how many pixels each of them should be. But you should do it for all columns or no columns, because it cannot really mix and match that it should auto size for some of them and not for others. Okay, so this is the advanced formatting. There's quite some learning curve to this, but again, you can see how much you can do compared to the simple ones. Okay, you write the SQL very simple, but it cannot do anything near this, because if I take this, for example, it begins to break down already, that it cannot really show the ones correctly here. You can see it goes to orders right now, but if I go to invoices, it will still go to orders. So the analyzer have broken down. If you go by our ways, okay, you need to do a little more, but it will work. That's the important part. Okay, let's move on. And the next one we have is, right now we have seen it as a report system, but it can also be a selection tool. And the way we do that is, let me close all this and let's have a look. Is if I go to this and take this one, you can see this have turned into a selection screen. I will show in 1 second how that's done. And I can choose some of the items and press select, and they will go back onto the screen that the report was launched from. So how to do that? Let's have a look. Again, I have not taken anything special with the SQL, and in these cases I don't want to bother you with the format as well. You can of course format these as well. But I've made a very simple SQL, just taking 10 items that are sales items and show them on the screen. And the only thing I've done in order to make it into a selection screen is I put in this special thing. So the select data target. What I've done is I've told the system the first column here, which is my selection, is that needs to go to this screen into item 38.1.0. So that's this item. Excuse me. And 38.1.1, we again see it in the system information as well. And we put that in, and that's all it needs. It will turn it into a selection screen. You can do the multiple selection and choose them back. That's it. This is the old and simple way of doing it. It still works, and it's still fine for most people. It can do a bit more in an advanced version. I will come to in just one bit. Only thing I want to say is you can also make selections be back to header level. So I could make one for this field or this field and select something back into that value. Then of course it doesn't make really sense to select multiple. It will just be the first you selected. That essentially means you can actually make your own custom choose from list. You can, with the validation system, catch that you press the tab key, it should open up a SQL report that will select something back. So you can make custom choose from list like that. I promised a bit more advanced one. The advanced one is with checkboxes instead. And what it can do is it begins to actually work together with the rest of B1 UP. So you can see I have a SQL again. Only difference from before is I have a new column called Y as checked, which is this one. And I have a 0 as quantity out here, which is this one. Rest is the same. Then I've told the system that the first column should be a selection checkbox. So instead of choosing your reports by doing this, it's now the ones that actually have a check is the ones we select back. So if I do something like this, put in some values for this, I will show you why these went on and off in 1 second. I can select back into the system using that instead. So that means that you actually have full control if something should default be selected or not. I can just write N and it's not default selected, or actually some case value which should be selected or not in the system. So you have full control over what should be default selected, what should not be default selected. The other one is I put in the format of making column 4, which was my quantity, editable. And that turns into be some very unique values propositions here, because I can make it into a screen that also choose the quantity I want to select back. So if I put 10, I can actually make it into saying that every time I put in a value here, it will check this checkbox. It's not something it does out of the box because it can be very different how and when it needs to do this. So it's actually a validation system. You can see in here where I'm actually saying every time I go out of this field, check if the quantity is different from 0. If it is, check it, else uncheck it. So I'm using macros in order to check that value, which is again this one. This is item 1, and the column name is checked. So I'm sending it to wire in, depending if I want to check or uncheck it. So again, you have full control. It could be that it should be above 10 before you actually put in the check or whatever you want in the system. In a similar manner, I've extended the select data target values out here. So you're seeing I'm still selecting the first one back. It's ignoring this because that's our selection tool. So the first column is for that reason is this one, and it needs to go back to 38.1.1. The second one is not really something I want to work with because that is just put in by SAP anyways. So I'm actually just skipping that by setting a semicolon, do nothing, and semicolon. So I'm telling now that the quantity field should go into 38.11.number, which is in our case the quantity. So if I select this back and take 12 here and 10 up there, you will see that it will actually select back, but also with the quantity intact. And there's no limit to how many targets you want to put back. So you can actually make it into a kind of spreadsheet with SQL Report, put in all the values you want, say select back, and it will select the data back into the screen. So that's the select data target system, which is very, very advanced. Again, good examples is have the customer on the line on the sales order quotation, have a button that quickly makes a SQL that checks what their buying behavior is, figure out what the top 10 items are in the most seller items right now, ask the customer. Actually, we have these special items here. They're really hot now, or they're on sale. Should I put in a few of those for you as well? Put in the number, so say select, and you do and you're back on track. So that's selection, and the second to last feature we have in here, because the last one, which is brand new again, is the charting feature. So charting, if the people who saw the last video focus session, which was called 10 kick-ass things you can also do with B1 UP, which is on YouTube if you didn't see it, so go check that out, showed a bunch of things about we be able to do charting. So charting, and I promised that this session would go into a bit more details on what that is. So the charting is quite simple. First of all, let's see a few, and then let's make a chart ourselves. So charting is like this. So you can see you can do different kinds of charts. Here is a stacked bar chart with the sales employees and how much they have sold for each year. You can also do line charts with different amounts in different countries, and you can do things like pie charts on how the distribution of the different activities we have in the system is in the business one. Very simple to do. So let's make a brand new chart and hook it up to a button. Again, the SQL I will keep simple. So my first chart, I can choose the size, but instead of grid, I will choose chart. Sometimes I actually choose grid beforehand in order to check my data, see if it's right, and once I see the data is correct, I go into chart mode. But let's, for demo purpose, just go directly to it. So let's make a very simple one. So let's select card code and doc total from OI and V. So this will just essentially be how much have every single card code given us in doc total. And I'm not doing any grouping here. Once you get more advanced, you might want to do the grouping up front. But just for demo purposes and for more options in the chart itself, let's keep it very simple. I don't want to do anything else. If you go into charting, some of these things go away. It doesn't make sense for collapse level. It doesn't make sense to have formatting. It doesn't make sense to have banded row colors, and it doesn't make sense to select something back from them. So there are certain things that just ignores you if you put them on, if you choose the view type of chart. Let's quickly have this button, my first chart, open up this one we put in. So that's 76. So the button should be here. And let's get rid of these so we see our system. So the first time you run a chart, you get the chart designer. We have a lot of e-learning on the chart designer itself on the YouTube channel. I will show you how to get to that in 1 second. Because charting itself is a whole hour by itself on how to actually do this. There's a lot of options to go on and do. So I won't be able to go into very high detail. I will just show a quick sample of how you do it, and then leave you on to see the e-learnings on charting it by itself. But let's quickly do it. I want a series, and I want to have them as bar charts. And over here I have all the different things that are on a chart. So that's X and Y axis, legends. In this case, I don't want a legend. I can put in a title if I want to, annotations and such things. But these are all the components of the chart. Then I have a preview of the chart, and since I haven't chosen anything yet, we'll get to that one in 1 second. It just shows some generic bar chart. It has nothing to do with my data and anything. It's just sample data. But in order to get that data, I need to go to the data tab here when I'm on the series. And I see my 2 columns I put into my SQL report, the card code and doc total, and I need to define which is the argument and which is the value. So I can say, technically, argument is the x-axis, value is y-axis. So I say my x-axis should be the card code, and my y-axis should be the doc total. And now it begins to live preview my data. Luckily, I only have a few business partners in here, else it would have had a lot of columns, of course. So I get some first things, but there's some strange things about these being multiple. So I just need to tell the system some more information. There's a learning curve of that, and again, that's the reason why I will highlight you the different e-learnings later on. general, we have an option tab, which is the more simple things. Should it, what type of system should it be? Should it have different colors or not? What should the different access be, and so on. I tend to not use this much because this is the simple version and this is the advanced version. So basically, almost everything that's in here is also over here, and you can do a lot of things. You can see, and this is just for this part of this is for the series. If you go to the x-axis, you see other behaviors. If you go for the y-axis, you see others, and so on. So you can do a lot of things. In my case, I just need to have a summary function in there, so I need to tell it should actually sum the doc total instead of just showing them one side by side. So now we have the summary of it instead. I can go in and color them so it perhaps looks a little nicer. I can go in then and begin to set all kinds of setups in here. I could say, for example, these grids down here, I actually want the labels to be on an angle of 45 degrees, and I want these numbers out here to go in and have a pattern of, I want to see it with some more formatting, so I can actually see it as a number. So I actually get it with comma, with thousand separators and decimal separators and so on. Again, too much to go into in this little session, but with a few clicks and a few drag and drops in here, you can see I actually get a report. I can choose some more advanced things if I want to have them as a bar instead of as a columns. I can turn it into column or line mode, areas, so on. So you have all the options of normal charting like you have in Excel or anything. And once you run it again, it will show that report. For super users, it will show the design tab here. For normal users, it will not. They will not be able to change the report itself. And if you want to go back and do further scenarios, you can go into the charting designer. But again, as I mentioned, go to our YouTube channel. So here I have our YouTube channel, BoyumIT, youtube.com/BoyumIT, and go into our search here and search for charting. You will see there's a playlist called SQL Report Charting, which has all kinds of scenarios and introduction, just as you saw today. What is single series, what is multiple series, how to work with dates, x-axis, y-axis, tooltips, legends, all the things. There's a lot of information in here that you can go to, in total of 18 videos, and if something is missing and you want to have some more options or learn some more, we will provide more videos on that. But the cool part is you can make charts now. You can make your boring old grids into more pleasing, more simple to understand scenarios with a few clicks. A bit high learning curve, but once you are there, you can pretty much do anything with these chartings. So with that, I will go to a few common questions before I open up Q&A session. So some common questions are especially around the collapse level. So if I have the collapse level in the system, and I had it up here, will I be able to do subtotals in here, in this cell and this cell, for example? And unfortunately, the answer is no. SAP are not allowing us to do it. There's simply no SDK that can do it right now. So that's the main reason it cannot be done. It's not because we don't want to give it to you. And the other one is if you use the order by and collapse level, SAP takes over on how this is formatted, so it will put in 2006 at the top and 2015 at the bottom. We cannot control what the ordering of these should be in the system by default, unfortunately. So there's just very two two very common questions we get with the SQL report. And with that, I will open up for questions. If you have any questions, write them in chat or open up your phone line. And while people, if there's any, ask the questions, I will draw your attention to the next feature focus session. That will be on the 20th of October, where the topic will be advanced macros commands, where we can do all the macro if and else statements and all the more funky commands out there. It will be my colleague Morten Petersen that will be in charge of this session. You're in good hands because he wrote the system. And he will be guiding you through that on the 20th of October. So with that, I thank you for attending. Let's see if there's any questions. Else you are okay to disconnect at this time. Okay, there seem to be no questions. So again, thank you and see you next time on the next feature focus session.